Hello, greetings. Welcome again to WLRC's 2021 Black History Month lecture um, by Dr. Sonia Donaldson. So first, of course, always thank the people who made things possible. This lecture is made possible through the generosity and support of the Honors College, the African American Cultural Center, the Office of Diversity, and of course, the staff of WLRC who've kind of done all the things behind the scenes to make this happen. Dr. Donaldson's lecture is one of several events being held on campus to recognize the contributions, questions, ideas, and provocations that come from and through peoples of the African diaspora, Black people, in this society and in this world. One of those contributions is certainly the song Lift Every Voice and Sing by James Weldon and Rosamond Johnson. I don't sing, but there are only 3 songs I've ever wanted to learn to sing. Be Thou My Vision, the South African anthem Nkosi Sikelel' Afrika, and Lift Every Voice and Sing. I was in my second year of living in the United States and my first year of college in upstate New York when I first heard the tune. My closest friend, Nadia, who is from Haiti and a year ahead of me, was practicing in the dorms for a performance that she was going to give at the local Baptist church in Schenectady, New York, probably for Black History Month. At her encouragement, I joined the gospel choir, which is really the Black Students College Choir. That's what it was, whose director traveled from Albany, New York to the campus to make sure that we got the song right. The highlight of our year, certainly for Black students on campus, for the entire 3 years I participated, was closing the month's celebrations with this song. There's a way that this anecdote is not really about this song. It's more about the way that human beings find and build community, identity, and develop a sense of history as both sacred and shared. It certainly speaks to the ways that we as Black peoples use sound to gather each other's spirits in visible, tactile, and felt ways. The same feelings that I've had since I encountered the song in 1986 still reverberates in every Black space that I've entered, from Schenectady, New York, Ann Arbor, Michigan, Omaha, Nebraska, and here in Chicago. Dr. Donaldson, a fellow Jamaican, is an associate professor of English, director of the Lee Hagen Africana Studies Center at New Jersey City University. Dr. Donaldson is a scholar of literatures of the African diaspora. Her research and teaching focus on Afro-German identities in the post-reunification era, 20th and 21st century African-American literatures, speculative fiction with a focus on migration, narratives, and globalization. Today's talk is focused on her digital humanities project, Singing the Nation into Being, which has been generously supported by the Virginia Humanities Fellowship at the University of Virginia. Please help me welcome Dr. Donaldson.
Thank you, Natalie, for this wonderful introduction. And I echo your thanks to the Women's Leadership and Resource Center, the Honors College, and the African American Cultural Center, as well as the Vice Provost for Diversity, the Office of the Vice Provost, for sponsoring this talk. This is a project that is near and dear to my heart, and in fact, came about from a sort of deep interrogation of my heart to kind of think about my relationship to this song. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the sort of, early sort of orientations, the beginnings of the song, and I'm going to look at a couple of performances to kind of think through specifically Black women and Black female performers and the relationship, what the performances might reveal to us. So as Natalie mentioned, this comes from a digital humanities project called Singing the Nation into Being, which is a collection of performances, mashups, and other creative compositions by folks who just created and uploaded video to YouTube. And so I started thinking about how the song was so resonant to so many people. So my initial sort of idea was that, oh, we don't sing this anymore, but that turns out to not be the case, right? So the more I dug, the more I realized the song is resonant and appears in so many ways. You know, I did a talk earlier this month, and we talked about the many lives of Lift Every Voice and Sing. So this is a project that is, as I said, a heart project in many ways. So Lift Every Voice and Sing, as Natalie mentioned, was written by James Weldon Johnson in 1899, and it was set to music. So I'm going to share my screen with you. It was set to music. I hope I'm sharing the right screen. Am I sharing the right screen? Here we go. I'm always nervous about these, even though I'm a tech person, believe it or not. So Lift Every Voice and Sing was written as a poem initially by James Weldon Johnson, meant to honor or sort of commemorate Abraham Lincoln's birthday. In 1900, on the eve of a visit to the Stanton School, where Johnson was a principal in Jacksonville, Florida. So this was a visit by Booker T. Washington. So on the eve of that, Rosamond set the poem to music, and thus Lift Every Voice and Sing, as we currently understand it, was born. So the way that Johnson conceived of the song was that it would be performed by 500 school children. And so from that very first performance of 500 school children at the Stanton School to the contemporary, right, which includes Beyonce's performance at Coachella and Chloe and Halle's recent performance at the opening of the NFL season, the song has been quite resonant and remains so in Black life, right? So Johnson was a true Renaissance man. He was a novelist, a lawyer, a teacher, a songwriter, an influential figure of the Harlem Renaissance, penning anonymously at first the autobiography of an ex-colored man. He was also a diplomat serving in the US consuls in Venezuela and Nicaragua. And he was the first African-American executive secretary for the NAACP, which happened in 1920. So his brother Rosamond was also a gifted composer and singer, and essentially charted the way for the brothers to enjoy a successful career on Broadway as songwriters and producers, working with Bob Cole. And a colleague of mine, Paula Marie Seniors, has actually written a wonderful book about that called Beyond Lift Every Voice and Sing. So Johnson's process of creation for the song, as he describes it, was really resonant with me. What he said, what he describes, right, in the moment of creating the song is ecstasy, and then contentment and serene joy, right? And so I think about how those sort of moments of expressive sort of emotion are embedded in Lift Every Voice and Sing. And the song comes to operate as a means of accessing sites of memory, right, for many people. So Johnson noted, of course, when he heard the children singing that the lines of the song repay me in elation, right, almost of exquisite anguish. So he's very, I mean, he's a poet, so, right? So all the feels, basically. But I wanted to give us a sense of what the sort of children singing the performance might sound like. So this is not the 500 children in 1900, but it is the 1981 Chicago Children's Choir performing Lift Every Voice and Sing. So I'm actually going to stop there just because I wanted to play the second verse simply because the second verse doesn't get played a lot typically. Um, so as I mentioned, the song has an important role in Black American life and culture. And Johnson notes in his autobiography that the song circulated both within and outside of Black spaces, right? In fact, it was a widely circulated as part of church hymnals, songbooks, mimeographed copies circulated. There were multiple requests from the song publisher for songs for public singing. But importantly, Johnson says, the song circulated in the voices of the Stanton school students who kept singing the song as they became school teachers, right? So the way that the song became central to Black life in great part is through the sort of oral passing down of this song. And I think that's when we talk about the circulation, right, we want to think about how the song sort of resonates with people in a great part because of that connection to orality, connection to community. But we also see its circulation in art and books and film and music and as part of activist discourses, right? So think about how many times sort of been called to action by the phrase lift every voice, right? Lift every voice, let's go protest, or lift every voice, right? So it's become really central and remains so in Black life, even as we don't necessarily think about it in terms of sort of a prominence, right? So how did I come to do a project on this? I'm just going to share with you the other two verses. So in 2011, I was a graduate student at the University of Virginia, and the poet Amiri Baraka came to speak as part of the Martin Luther King Black History Month celebrations. And the undergraduate student group Black Voices sang Lift Every Voice and Sing. They performed the first verse and we all sat down. Baraka was introduced and he sort of, came to the podium and sort of leaned forward in a very Baraka-esque style and says, there's more to that song. There's a lot more. And I thought, well, yeah, I know there are two other verses. We didn't sing it. There's probably a time constraint. But, I sat with that idea of more to think about what he was essentially telling us or asking of us. Right? First, yes, there are two more verses to sing. But secondly, so this is Baraka looking at me as I imagine saying, there's more. Um, um, but that the song has a deeper, more significant meaning, right? And so for Baraka, the song initiated what he called a we-ness, right? A collective understanding of what it means to be Black in America. So Lift Every Voice and Sing was foundational for him in asserting his own humanity and that of Black people, because it provided a map and a diagram, right? A historic journey for him. And this is something that he could draw on throughout his life. And it provided what he calls a sweeping recall of racist violence, as well as Black dignity and strength in confronting the ugliness of American racism. And it created beauty in that maelstrom, right? So the song was central in creating connection to family and to community, right? But it also has embedded in it, because of that connection, a history that Black people could turn to, right, as a source of strength or as comfort in their encounters with the nation sort of writ large, right? And so I wanted to think about this idea of connection to family, community, orality, in the context of we-ness, right? And so, of course, we started with Ramona playing those opening strains of Beyonce's Lift Every Voice and Sing, performing at Coachella. And what I find, so I'm not going to play it. I actually don't have the video, so I'm not going to play it. But what I found really interesting about this was what she said afterwards in an interview, right? Which is that for her, this represented, the performance was a way of sort of reclaiming something that she had lost. And so because of the way that she'd grown up as sort of a celebrity, a singer very early, she did not have the opportunity to be part of the, to have the Black college experience, to be in, sororities, to go to the games, all those things. And so for her, this was the opportunity to participate in this cultural aspect of Black life, right? So it's really interesting to think about, again, the resonance of the song as this articulation of loss, but also a way of reclaiming something, right? And what I find, again, that is so resonant is the way that then she attends to that weeness, right? Which, as we saw with Baraka, who learned the song early in his life, right? He establishes it as a foundation for his youth. So for me, this is such an important moment, right? I want to do it again. It feels good. So this goes back to, Johnson's sort of the effective space that he's in when he creates it, but also how the song affects you. And at the level of the child learning the song, there's something that's embedded in it that makes her feel good, right? And so Beyonce takes from what she sort of what she sees as a missed opportunity, a kind of loss, and ensures that generationally that loss doesn't necessarily occur, right? So she is starting early by teaching Blue Ivy the song that is resonant with Black life and giving her, again, that claim to a kind of weeness through the song. But in the context of Black women's performances, a call for weeness is not simply a call to memory and community, right? For Black women, it's often a call to labor. And so in thinking about these performances, I draw on Farah Jasmine Griffin's essay, When Melindy Sings, a meditation on Black women's vocality. And Griffin alerts us to the ways that Black women's public performances of the American national anthem, and what she calls other healing songs, actually reveal this persistent demand to perform nationness, right? To heal a crisis in national unity. But alongside that call for healing is what she calls a provocation. And this provocation might serve as a prompt to initiate healing or to create the conditions for dissent, right? As she says, to forge a space of resistance. And so historically, Black women's voices have been co-opted to represent an imagined national identity, that of a nation united and unified racially and representing simultaneously what and where we are and what and where we want to be. And so there's tension in those two ideals, right? There's tension in those things. And so part again of this project is to thinking about those sites of tension and to think about what we might better understand through these performances in terms of how Black women sort of negotiate the demands placed on them and their own politics, right? So typically when we think about sort of, significant anthem performances, right, we go to Whitney Houston's 1991 performance of the Star Spangled Banner. And this is Super Bowl 25. And in this historical moment, I am told it's the Giants versus the Bills. I'm not a football person, so. But this is 10 days after the US launches into the first Persian Gulf War, right? And so journalist Danielle Smith says, this was the start of a branding relationship between the armed forces and the NFL that has grown vine-like around a state of perpetual war. And Whitney Houston was just 27 years old when she performed. And I'm just going to play a small part of this. There's a whole, for this video, there's like a little narrative that precedes it, which I find really interesting. Whitney Houston's performance was recirculated again in a fundraising effort after the September 11th attack, right? So I'm always fascinated by the spectacle of all of this. And so this is considered the foundational performance, right, in the contemporary, kind of blueprint, if you will, for Black women's performance of nation at these events. As we've later come to know, the performance was actually recorded and not live, and so that's probably a second book. And I'm sure Miss Aretha Franklin feels, was just sort of like, I sang live, right? So, but Smith notes that Whitney Houston boldly interpolated our anthem and sang it as well as it will ever be sung. Remember, So again, she's tapping into memory here. When her version was re-released in the aftermath of the September 2001 attacks, Houston gave her Feast to Charity. She roused and comforted a nation. And so Smith is demonstrating here, right, that there's an understanding of Black women's voices as the voices that are called, voices and bodies really, that are called to comfort, that are called to create the context, not just for national healing, but for the creation of nation itself, or creation of a nation that is healed and whole, right? And so what happens when Black women answer the call, but create a context by which their own politics of dissent can emerge? So Houston's performance here can't simply be read as acceding to a national call to undergird the US military industrial complex, right? The war machine. Her performance is an embodied cultural act that articulates Black women's sociopolitical loss and grief and spirited dissent and dissonance, as Daphne Brooks argues. Houston infuses the performance with Black feminist politics, from her sartorial choices to her vocality to her presence. The performance carries the history and the experiences of African Americans in its sonic articulation, albeit previously recorded, of the blues and soul. And so we can think about how Whitney Houston sort of infuses what is essentially lyrics to a bar song, a drinking song, right? With this sort of richness and wealth of history and sound and culture, right? Even as that sort of vocal force is being marshaled to rally the nation around war, right? It's not just a football game, which is a sort of miniaturized version of the larger war, right, taking place. And so her performance highlights the dissonance, right? The tensions between the nation's demands for elision or amnesia and Black freedom, which demands a full reckoning with the nation's historical legacy of violence. So there's tension at play in this performance, right? And I find it really interesting. The visuals are really interesting because it's the Black sort of Marine who keeps reappearing in the visual for this. So Black women's performances of Lift Every Voice and Sing also make visible the limits of nation for Black subjects. Black women's resistive performances instantiate Black women's performances instantiate resistance and reveal the contingencies of belonging for Black subjects. So ideas of national belonging that are predicated on Black women's singing of nation are determined ultimately by who is listening and what those listeners choose to hear, what they recognize and understand in the evocations. Further, these performances, which provide a space for Black women's enactments of freedom, also demarcate the boundaries of those freedoms, right? So I'm going to turn to another case that I think illustrates a good deal of the tension that that we see at play, and one artist's sort of potential working through of those tensions. And so in 2008, African-American jazz singer Renee Marie was invited to sing the national anthem at Denver Mayor John Hickenlooper's State of the City address. And Hickenlooper, as we know, also ran for president, but kind of kicked out pretty early. So it was her innovative compositions, which were well known locally, that captured the interest of the mayor's office. And they invited her to sing at the State of the City address. And so Marie arrived and sang the national anthem at the State of the City address.
Thank you, Lucia. At this time, please welcome Renee Martin to sing our national anthem.
Hour.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with a harmony of liberty. Let our rejoicings rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of a new day begun. Well, let us march on till victory is won.
I could watch this on loop forever, forever. It's one of my favorite things. And I listen to Lift Every Voice and Sing every single day that I work on this. This is one of my favorite things. So in case you were wondering what was happening as the people in the audience were, Renee Marie substituted the words of Lift Every Voice and Sing and performed it to the tune of the American national anthem, the Star Spangled Banner. And so, as I mentioned earlier, the tune of the Star Spangled Banner is actually an old drinking song, the Anacreontic song, right? To Anacreon in heaven. Don't have me singing, I'm not a singer. Right, so it's a bar song. The tune is a bar song. And her performance was not an easy feat. Thankfully, she's a trained professional. She's an expert in this. It was a demonstration of vocal dexterity and composition virtuosity, right? This is not an easy thing to sing, even for seasoned people. For those in the audience, the song both created a sense of comfort, right? A kind of knowability about itself, right? It feels familiar in some way. And in part, it's because of the expectation that the national anthem, right? There is only one national anthem, right? But there's also cognitive dissonance, right? It's unfamiliar and jarring. It's like, I'm supposed to know this, but I don't really, but it's familiar in some way, right? It's a destabilizing movement for sure, right? It's disruptive and it makes people uncomfortable. I felt really sorry a little bit for the guy with the hand over his heart who, in my thinking, in my imagination, was just sort of like, that's not the national anthem, but I can't move my hand because it will be bad. And then you have the African-American man behind her who's just glaring and nervous at the same time. So there are whole levels of discomfort that are happening right now in this performance, which is one of the reasons I love it so much. So suffice it to say, her performance set off a firestorm of controversy, right? It was covered on news broadcasts. People created video responses to her. The video was posted on, videos, right, were mashed up, chopped up, posted on YouTube with commentary. So people were creating their own mashups interspersed with sort of news reports. And And she was genuinely taken aback, right? The performance even made it into the 2008 presidential campaign when a senator from Illinois who was running for president said, well, if she was asked to sing the national anthem, she should have sung that. Lift Every Voice and Sing is a beautiful song, but we only have one national anthem. So this person, this senator from Illinois, then went on to sort of to incorporate Lift Every Voice and Sing in his presidential campaign. And when he was elected to the office of president, the benediction by Reverend Joseph Lowery began with Lift Every Voice and Sing. So in an interview, Marie explained that the performance captured how she felt to be a Black American woman. And she said, I viewed the invitation to be a door open to me to sing this version of the Star Spangled Banner, right? So she considers it, calls it a version of the Star Spangled Banner. Others needed to hear it as much as I needed to sing it. And so in this moment, she expresses an understanding of how the desire for the Black female singing voice, the healing voice, functions, right? As sound and spectacle and as fulfilling a need for someone else, and fulfilling a need for someone else, right? But she asserts the power as composer and singer to determine what song is needed. In this case, she decides both, and what that sounds like, right? So she further asserts her own need, one that is as important as the desire for her to sing, for her to be singing, right? Not one that is subsumed to the demands of the city or the nations, right? And so this kind of reminds me of stories I've heard about Nina Simone during performances where people demand that she sing, and she, you know, it might be apocryphal. I'll sing what I think you should hear, right? And so this is a moment, right, where Marie is asserting a power as singer, as composer, as creative, to determine what needs to be heard in this moment, what that healing looks like, what that unity looks like, right? I'm being called to do this, but I make the determination about what is best and necessary for healing or to bring community together in this space. So the composition or recomposition serves dual purposes, right? On the one hand, this juxtaposition disrupts the narrative of nation, right? And it refutes the suggestion, and particularly after or in light of an Obama presidency, that African Americans had suddenly somehow arrived at a moment of full membership in the nation, right? And so given the historical moment, Marie's appropriation and displacement of the dominant narrative disputes this idea that there is a shared language and a shared understanding of nation and citizen and belonging for all Americans, right? The controversy and discourses sort of post-performance actually make that pretty clear. So her move fuses the multiple experiences of what it means to be African American, right? To actually claim Americanness, to claim the nation for her. And she reshapes the sounds and text to create a sound of nation that includes her own experiences and her family's experiences. And she specifically says her own experiences as a Black woman in America, right? So one of the things that she talks about in a later part of the interview is that the Star Spangled Banner for her did not reflect the stories and the experiences of as shared to her by her family of what it meant to be an American. And so she wanted to create a text, a song that incorporated the multiplicity of Black experiences into this idea of a national anthem, right? And so part of what Renee Marie is evoking here is what Matthew Morrison calls Black sound, right? Which is a theory, it's a theory of historical embodiment to trace the ephemerality and materiality of the sounds produced by Black bodies within the history of popular music in the United States, right? So there is a thread and a connection between Renee Marie's work, Beyonce performing Lift Every Voice and Sing, her teaching Blue Ivy, Lift Every Voice and Sing, Whitney Houston's Star Spangled Banner. All of those are evidence of Black sound and the way that the sound actually infuses and enriches the nation, right? And so for her, the invitation to sing is not just to heal or to fix, but to transform through this sonic dissonance, right? It's dissonant for the those in attendance. And so Black women's performances frequently tap into this sort of recuperative instinct, right, that is embedded in this national demand. And it's a demand that their labor be both physical and emotional, right? So Black women are called to be physical and emotional laborers, to heal, to fix, to nurture, to care for. And what I see in Renee Marie's performance is this really delicate calibration between a public demand and her own political desires. And so one of the things that she talks about in this interview again is the part of the reason for fusing or sort of melding the two songs, recreating, recompositioning, is that ideologically, for her, ideologically, and in their singularity, they were not, neither song fully conveyed the experiences for her, right? And so this fusion represents her way of trying to essentially sort of unify those warring bodies, if you will, those sort of contentious, sort of dissonant things, and dissonant at the level for her of ideology, right? But also sound. But what she does is make apparent, right, the invisible layers of discourse that sort of live below the surface of nation. So one of the things that I also do with this work, with her performance in particular, and there are many iterations of this performance, I look at the comment section. And I've actually learned a lot from comment section, like a lot, including some language I didn't know I needed to learn. But, but what it reveals, right? Comment section are very rich in terms of revealing how people understand themselves as part of a national body, how they understand who belongs and the terms of belonging for them. So we see a lot of sort of meanness, right, that was directed at Renee Marie. And she responded to that, right, with that displeasure. So she says, it's true, not everybody was pleased with it. I was surprised by that at first. Not that they were not pleased with it, because I know everybody's taste is different. And I know people not gonna like everything you do. But I was surprised at the level of anger that accompanied it. The anonymity of the internet allowed them to say exactly how they were thinking and feeling. I thought, wow, all these people that are emailing me and calling me on the phone, they're all Americans, and I'm getting to hear what these strangers think and feel about this music, about races, about Obama, about me. So people looked her up and called her, emailed her, in addition to, right? And so thinking again about the sort of boundaries of nation, right? The borders that sort of get erased or pushed, if you will. And the response to that is in the context of violence, right? So this really takes me back to Whitney Houston's performance and thinking about, you know, what it means to be called to sort of reify nation in particular moments, and the violence that is attendant to those calls, right? The violence that is for Black women to contend with as well. So Renee Marie, post this performance, received about 1,600 email messages in addition to phone calls and the commentary. And so what does it mean? What is the legacy of Renee Marie's performance? What does it mean for an artist to bring sort of diametrically opposed ideologies in conversation in a place and time that is explicitly about one way of understanding nation? And what is the work that her performance has done and for whom? And so I'm going to kind of move into something that is not complete, and it's deliberately not complete. So I'm ending with this because I hope that what we could do is sort of collectively think through about sort of afterlives, right, of the Whitney Houston performance and of the Renee Marie performance. I'm just going to play, well, maybe leave a note in the chat, or sort of raise your hand, or some sort of response when you hear what. So embedded in the Star Spangled Banner are sort of the opening strains of Lift Every Voice and Sing, right? And so if we think about the controversies that have sort of, have sort of embroiled the NFL in terms of Colin Kaepernick's protests, Black Lives Matter. This is a moment where these two young Black women essentially assert boldly in terms, again, of their sartorial choices, right? They each of them wears the image of an African-American who was killed by police, Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. It evokes and engages with the Black Lives Matter movement. And it is in the context of football, America's pastime. And the tensions within that space, right? People were booing in the audience, for example. And so I wanted to think about, if we think of Whitney Houston as sort of the blueprint, right? that is a space in which Black women are called to heal, but express their own set of politics. And we see a newer generation of Black women in the same space, right, of football. What is the work that these performances do? What is the insistence on Black women as the voices and the bodies that best express nation, even as they are that expression, those expressions of nation are in the context of violence, right? Whether it's a sort of sports violence, political violence, sort of cultural or otherwise, right? There's something that is happening in terms of this demand. And is the demand ever satisfied? Will it ever be, right? And so I'm just gonna end with those questions, and hopefully you'll have some more for me. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. That was an incredible talk. Questions from the audience?
I'm gonna stop sharing.
I think we're going to go to gallery mode now. Yeah, okay.
I know Natalie has a ton of questions for you while you're writing. Oh my gosh.
So while I guess we wait, the question of who is the we, and how these different performances kind of interrogate that. I'm actually connecting that back to I think even the anecdote that I shared about like the college space, the university space, what is it that the performance of the song does in that space that then people take out? The kind of we-ness that is being fostered, especially on predominantly white campuses, I think.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that just stood out for me. And then the performance in the context of violence. And I remembered the Black woman who everybody holds up as like offering the most spectacular, complete public performance is Marian Anderson, right? And again, the ways that she comes to even be visible at the Lincoln Memorial is because of the kind of symbolic violence against her, the Daughters of the American Revolution. So, so if you could speak to either of those, like the importance of context and how we come into this we-ness, and then the violence question.
Oh, the violence question. Those are both great questions and hard questions. The we-ness, I can speak a little bit anecdotally, but okay, so part of how I came to the song, as you mentioned, I'm Jamaican, grew up in Southern California. And for me, part of becoming African American, right, and being incorporated into a Black community that consisted of folks from the South who had migrated west during the war and settled in South Central Los Angeles and carried that Southern Black culture with them. And so part of being as immigrants, part of being in community in that space, right, was through the learning of the song. My mom still won't clarify for me how she came to know the song, except vaguely to say, we went to community meetings. I'm assuming they were NAACP meetings, but she won't say. So clearly she was part of the community in more ways than simply sort of living in the space, right? And so this was a way in which I got oriented to the song when I went to college. I pledged a Black sorority, lift every voice and sing. So for me, it was a way to become part of a community and to begin to understand and share the history, right? And the experiences that you know that is embedded in that history as well. And so it's not a complete sort of alignment, obviously, because there's also a Jamaican population in the space. And so, but I think, I think there's something in the orality. There's something about that in terms of how the song gets passed on in Black spaces that creates, right, this sense of we-ness. And I should add that part of what I look at is how the song gets taken up in other places. So I also look at the German context, for example, in which Lift Every Voice and Sing becomes really central as part of a conversation about reparations between Germany and Namibia, sort of, in recognition of the first genocide of the 20th century and Germany's colonial past, which was sort of obscure by the fact that they lost the war and lost their colonies. So they were like, we didn't do it, right? But people, Namibians have been persistent in their demands for reparations and justice. And so part of that ceremonial sort of event included the singing of Lift Every Voice and Sing in Germany. So there are also ways in which the song, and I think this was also part of Johnson's idea, right, that the song wouldn't necessarily be tied to nation per se, but would be a sort of diasporic song that circulated. So he was very much invested in the circulation of the song broadly, right? He's like, yay, make it rain with Lift Every Voice and Sing. Like, that's bad. You can cut that out of the recording. but yeah, filters. But he was very much invested in the circulation of the song and saw it as a way in which folks could connect, through a sort of, I guess, beyond sort of national borders, if you will. And so the violence, the question of violence for me is really central, because I kind of go back and forth. On the one hand, I can see and understand the resistive strategies, but I also see the ways in which there's a kind of recapture, right? So in as much as there is an expression of the artist politics in terms of the performance, and in terms of revealing this idea of a we-ness at a national level, revealing the lie of that essentially, right? For me, that also represents a kind of violence. Because Black women are continuously called, right, to do this labor, even as they're subjected to violence. So I think about the Chloe and Halle performance, and people are booing, and I think about all of these ways in which, when I looked at the comment section from Renee Marie's video, there was really horrible. So I couldn't even imagine getting 1,600 emails saying you're a terrible person for singing a song, for being creative, right, and singing a song. So I think that there's a way in which, in as much as there's a power, I think the way that as a nation we are so hardwired to make the demands on body, right, without an understanding of that there also exists intellect And there's a way in which it is I think it's also a desire to sort of make the Black bodies, Black people conformed to a marginal kind of belonging, right? And so again, if you look at the Whitney Houston video, right, it's the Black female singer, and the thing you see immediately afterwards is the image of the Black Marine saluting, right? And then it switches to the white woman singing, and they're waving the little tiny flags. So for me, it sometimes feels a little perverse. There's like a perversion to this constant demand. And when I read Halle's statement about, they actually postponed the release of their album so they could respond to the moment in respect to the killing of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. But they also were thinking about their work in the context of like healing, right? And it wasn't really clear whether they're talking about Black people healing or national healing, right? And so, yeah, for me, it seems as if that violence is inescapable, and in as much as, again, there's an assertion of a kind of like, power to name and expose sort of these foundational violences that we still get killed in our sleep.
So there are two questions on the table. One about the term you used regarding Renee Marie, vocal dexterity and composition virtuality. So could you say a little bit more about that? And then the question that I know you were going to anticipate, like you knew it was going to come, right?
Yes.
What do you think about Representative James Clyburn's call to make Lift Every Voice and Sing the national anthem?
No. I'll just say no. I'm kind of old school. And there are a lot, actually. There was a similar no after Renee Marie's performance. They actually went to African Americans, random African Americans, and say, what do you think of her doing this thing? And their response was that, no, it's our song and it means something specific to us as Black people in the context of this nation. But I think also part of that is that seems symbolic more than actually coming to terms with, right? I mean, just as in the German context, Vergangenheitsbewältigung, right? Coming to terms with the past. There seems, so these moments seem like more like symbolic moment than actual reckoning. And I think folks are right to be sort of wary and push back against that, right? There hasn't been a national reckoning. And so how can we simply have Lift Every Voice and Sing, which means something particular to us, right? Even if it has circulated in other spaces, Songs of Zion, songbooks and other places, it means something particular to Black people. And we can't really have that conversation about being the national anthem without a conversation and a reckoning, right? So for some people, I think it felt dishonest to sort of, either incorporate it, mash it with the Star Spangled Banner, or to propose that it become the national anthem.
And then that other question about clarifying those two concepts that you offered.
Yeah, I think that goes back to composition virtuosity, not virtuality. So vocal dexterity. So and what I mean by that is thinking about the skill that it requires, but also this goes back to Matthew Morrison's notion of Black sound, right? That it incorporates the ephemeral, the material. So what you're hearing in the Black female singing voice is history. It's Black history, it's music, it's musical history, right? It's soul. There's something at the core that produces this voice that evokes the thing that is the thing that is so desired, right? Even as the bodies themselves are not are not wanted as part of the nation, but there is something that the sound does that satisfies something. And then composition virtuosity, the way that she took the two songs and understood them as sort of sonic objects, but also as ideologies, right? And rework them to attempt to actually make them into a singular whole to do the work that she wanted a single song to do. So that's what I mean by composition virtuosity, that it's intellectual work, that it's not simply her saying, I'm gonna do this, thing, but it's to actually, you can see and hear the work that goes into the performance of the song.
Mm-hmm. And I think because we're not accustomed to thinking about music and sound in intellectual terms, and to think about it in terms of feeling terms, or how does it like resonate with my mood, but not the kind of deep history and the technical skills and the kind of, again, as you say, the kind of recognition of ideology and why the song is what it is.
Yeah.
We're not accustomed to thinking about music in that way at all. So yeah.
Right. Yeah. And for me, I mean, I'll just say I'm not a musicologist. I'm not trained in any musical ways. I took piano lessons when I was younger, but it never stuck because you had to sit. and I'm not a sitter. So it was really difficult to, and so, but what I do is I train myself to listen to and hear music. And so I teach a course on hip hop, reading hip hop. And literally I tell my students, you have to train yourself. So I might loop a song for an entire day, 3 days, the same song for 3 days, until I can discern movement, shifts in sound, shifts in music and instruments, in breath, all of those things. And so part of it is me just sort of really being attuned to wanting to, be better at music, but in this way, in terms of knowing, without necessarily being sort of formally trained. That's also important, I think. So.
Other questions from the audience? One of the, I think as many people probably know, so this lecture is part of a kind of program that it's, there's a way in which it feels organic. So we put out a call for people to perform Lift Every Voice and Sing. But in the process of the conversation about kind of soliciting responses, we are now developing a collaboration with the Disability Cultural Center to make visible African American Sign Language, using African American Sign Language to actually kind of perform the song.
Oh, that's great.
What did I tell you?
Great.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Sign language. I didn't realize it was oh, that's amazing. I'm excited about that. So yeah, I don't know if we have time to just kind of glance, but I'll put it in here.
Mm-hmm. That
my website.
Okay. Yeah, that program will be in the end of March, but it just reminds me that there are many ways that people kind of enter the song and
Yeah.
engage with the music.
Yeah.
And I think I'm very curious about the conversation that's going to come out of that because if the song is about we-ness in a sense of belonging, it belongs to us.
Mhm.
How have people who are not able to hear it,
Right.
often produced in a particular way, how are
Right.
they able to kind of engage with it and kind of create that
Oh,
sense
that sounds really great. That sounds
Yeah.
really great. Yeah.
I'm very
Um,
excited about that.
yeah, I was gonna say something, but I think I lost my train of thought. It had to do with what you were saying. But wow. That's going to be awesome. So, I do have, oh, I know what I was going to say. So, one of the interesting things that happened when I first started, working on this project and talked about this project and did a presentation is that people who were not Black, and in fact, the first time I presented on this project, which was in another form, were people in the audience who were white were raising their hands and not asking questions, but essentially almost like testifying about their relationship to the song, how they came to it, and what it means to them. And so for me, that those very early conversations also really opened up the space to think about this song in the context of sort of what it means to Black communities. What was interesting about those folks who were white, who were talking about the song, they had never heard it called the Black National Anthem.
Okay.
Right? They didn't know that it had that kind of resonance and meaning for African Americans. They found it in, church hymnals, folks who did, I think it's Outward Bound, for example. So they learned about it in sort of a kind of a religious, social, other contexts that were outside of African American experiences and knowledge of the song. So I thought there's a whole sort of other universe of lift every voice and singers. And I tried to incorporate that in some of the videos that are in the collection. So you will see, there's a Mormon Tabernacle Choir performance, and that was in concert with the NAACP as a kind of move to repair. So they perform Lift Every Voice and Sing. There are white people singing "Lift Every Voice and Sing" in the collection as well. There are Black people singing "Lift Every Voice and Sing" in white spaces. I think there's one performance in Denmark by a university choir. So there are all sorts of, and then again, of course, the one of the works I write about is in the German context with Namibia. So there are all sorts of contexts for the song, which I think are really interesting that can be explored. And I find it interesting that I think most people would agree that it's a beautiful song, no question. People are offended by the use of the word Black to describe the song, right?
Yeah. Yeah. There's a comment in the
Yeah.
about that many white Chicagoans admit that they first heard it when Harold Washington became mayor.
Yes. Yes. And it's a beautiful song.
Yeah.
No question. I feel the same way as Johnson might have felt sometimes when I hear a really beautiful rendition of the song. It's, yeah.
Okay. So
Natalie,
I don't want this to end. Yes.
you can't see me. I'm kind of waving, but you can't see.
Okay.
Cynthia?
You have a question?
Yes, I do have a question. Thank you so much, Sonia, for this talk and for really opening up and representing this song in such a nuanced and interesting way. So my question is about, again, returning to we-ness, thinking about how you became a part of we, right? So for you, there's a certain intentionality about that. And Natalie knows I'm Jamaican as well. And so the question for me is my own relationship to the song
Mhm.
is both a process of embracing it as a we, but also feeling not fully part of that we at the same
Mhm.
time. So the question is, how does that song, um, how might it also, besides being we, also create boundaries that for um, for Blacks in the diaspora not born in the U.S.
Yeah, I mean, one of the beautiful things about this song is that for me, it created a we-ness in the context of the US, but it's also a song that operates outside of the US boundaries and borders, right? So it was like it was translated into, I'm gonna screw this up. So Ova Himbo language, I believe. I don't even know if I'm saying that correctly. So it has a life that is mobile. And I think Johnson's sort of intent was for that to occur. So he was very big on the circulation and sort of reproduction of the song in spaces outside of the sort of African American space proper. And so I think that that's part of it, is that in the US context, we might, you know, I think even without the song, there is a sort of we-ness, but there are sort of contingencies of belonging, as I would say, right, in that we-ness. What's interesting is I like history, and I like to look at kind of, other people's backgrounds. And so Johnson's family is originally from the Caribbean, right? His grandparents are Caribbean people. I've been making a list of all the people with Caribbean ancestry, and I'm like, Du
Wow.
Bois, we get Du Bois, we get James Weldon Johnson. So, and certainly his location in Jacksonville, Florida as well. I think, that site and its sort of proximity, to Caribbean spaces. But yeah, I think, there are always contingencies of belonging, right? There's never going to be an easy sort of alignment. For me, I was and certainly I'm not completely aligned, because I claim my Jamaicanness very proudly. So I think it's never going to be an easy alignment, but the song affords a kind of we-ness that allows for sort of contingent belonging, I think.
We'll take the final question. Charisse, over to you.
Thank you so much. Please excuse my muffledness. I'm in the doctor's office with my mom, but thank you so much, Dr. Donaldson, for your presentation. I find it extremely interesting, and being from, well, half of my lineage being also from the Caribbean, you already touched on some of what my question was in your previous response. I guess my question now is, just based on your work and what you see yourself doing in the future, is there a take-home message you would like us all to have, in terms of um, how we process or how we engage others when it comes to listening and the we-ness, etc.? What would be a good take-home message?
Yeah. Okay. So, I think for me, if we're talking about Black women's performance, right? I think the important thing for me is to think about the ways that that demand for labor is in sort of tension or negotiating with Black women's demands, right, for a kind of recognition, all right? So so for me, it's in thinking through how, and this applies right beyond the context of singing. If we think about sort of how we move as Black women through the world, in terms of the demands that are placed upon us, like save us, right? And what we desire to see, right? Or to have happen, right? So I think those tensions always exist. Um, uh, I mean, I wish I had an answer. I'm still questioning. And from, when I saw Chloe and Halle performing in the context of football, in the context of violence, I'm sort of, I'm a little kind of troubled that the context doesn't seem to shift, even as I think there is a different and maybe a greater level of understanding of our positionalities as Black women within these contexts. I'm I'm not being optimistic right now. but yeah, in the context of Weena, someone asked me that, I think a conversation about what can we take away? And for me, it is to do the thing that Beyonce was doing with Blue Ivy, right? Which is to teach the children the song and to sing it, to incorporate it in our daily, weekly lives, carry it with us, right? I think about Amiri Baraka and what he said about the song and what it did for him, right? It gave his work, it gave him a map and a way of ordering and understanding the world that I think was really important to him, right? And so, so in addition to it, that song carries a full history, right? One of the reasons I'm so intent on thinking about that second verse, right? I consider the verse, and I write about this in my project, I consider that verse the middle passage, right? That's the difficult passage, right? And that's the one that doesn't get sung frequently. Like typically, when there are performances, if they're short on time, they'll do the first verse. If they have a little bit more time, they'll do 1 and 3, right? The second verse is hard, right? It begins, stony the road we trod, right? And so it's a difficult verse. This is the section, this is the middle passage, this is the pain, right? That gets articulated. This is the pain of Black life, the hard thing that Black people had to experience, right, in order to be on the path, right? And it's essentially telling us, we're not there yet, right? So people like to end with the first verse because it's like, let us march on till victory is won, right? And the second verse is like,
Well,
yeah. And even to think about how the way it's typically sung, right? It's different, right? It creates a different mood and it shifts the context from the first verse. So yeah, not ending optimistically. Happy Black History Month. Sorry.
oh, that was great. That was fine. Thank you. Can we just give Dr. Donaldson a round of applause? Thank you for a great conversation, for opening up new opportunities to do critical work around Black women in sound. And thank you again for your time.
Thank you. And I just want to say that the project, if you go to the Singing the Nation site, the project is actually open to collaboration, and I will actually share code and data with you if you want to work with the collection as well. So that's also available.
Okay. Yeah, definitely gonna think about it. Right, Cynthia? For sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank
All right,
you.
thanks everybody for coming, for staying with us, listening, engaging, and we have lots of other things going on, not just for Black History Month, but of course for the rest of the semester. Check out our website and hope to see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for coming.